Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number 158. I don't know why I keep forgetting that, even though I keep reading it, and then I keep forgetting it over and over again. My name is Colin Moriarty. I think for the first time ever, Dustin, this is true, that we are the five of us gathering together in one episode, which is pretty wild. We're testing the very limits of technology by doing this episode of Sacred Symbols Plus. Welcome all. Of course, we see the Dukes here. We'll get to them momentarily, but first, let's say hello to Chris and Dustin. Chris Raygun, my son. How are you today?
I'm well. I just inhaled a grilled cheese, so
nice.
I'm ready.
What kind of cheese?
I don't know. Just whatever I fucking had, you know.
That's not a surprising answer at all. Well, it's good to see you. Welcome. You have it's not really, but you almost have like a Steve Jobs thing going on right now.
Yeah, I got a little bit of turtleneck.
Yeah, is that a hint of things to come from PlayStation? Who knows? Dustin Furman, executive producer of All Things Last Stand. How are you today, my friend?
Good. I'm glad that we're finally doing this. But right before we started, I said, I don't know how we're going to arrange this on the video version. We're going to be like some shitty gaming Brady Bunch, I think. Or actually, I compared it in our Discord to like the 90s show Hollywood
Squares.
Hollywood Squares. Yeah, something like that. So we're all crammed into this video somehow. We're like trapped in these boxes. But I'm excited. This is finally, we did one kind of like this where it was just the three Sacred Boys and Maddie. And I think that was right around before we got Cog in. And so now
it was in transition, I believe.
Yeah. Now to have the full force, I don't even know if people are, when they see this episode, whether they'll die, maybe they'll cry, maybe they'll come.
Maybe they won't. I wish you stopped when I interrupted you.
I said what I said.
All right. Dustin, thank you for that. That was disturbing. Appreciate that. Let's get to the Dukes now. Mr. Matty Plays. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm doing great now. That caught me off guard. I'm doing well, though. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this, get everyone's temperature on this. It's interesting because this is one of those topics where every response you have, there is a flank. Right. So everyone is very vulnerable off the get-go because there's always an immediate response. So I'll be curious to see how patient everyone is with hearing each other out before we jump all over the place. But I'm ready for a battle here. I'm ready.
Yeah. Oh, good. Welcome. I'm glad that you have that, that constitution and that bravado to bring to the show today. And finally, last but not least, of course, Lord
Am I doing it right, Cog?
Yeah, that's how we do this.
Yes.
Welcome, my friend. How are you today?
Colin, what's up, man? Oh, man, this is long overdue. I'm so happy for this. Like, what an event, right? And just to get everyone together, unified, we all feel strongly on certain things. And I'm excited, man. Symbols and the Dukes, let's go, man. The Avengers have assembled.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. Well, that's very nice of you to say. You're coming straight off of a day of work, too. So thank you for making the time. I know that's tiring. Of course, the events of the last week or so demand us to be together. In fact, I don't want to say resistant, but I was hesitant to do this because I was like, well, are people going to be tired of this subject? Should we move on to something else? But I was persuaded that I think this is a necessary episode, and just to wave the white flag and meet under peaceful circumstances. Although I got to be honest, I listened to some of your guys' show. I know what we did. I don't really feel like we were getting out of hand on our show.
I agree.
But nonetheless, tensions are high. It's kind of annoying, actually, out there. By the way, Cog, before we begin, I do want to congratulate you. I mean, you had a 6-hour plus episode of the Iron Lords podcast that I was on, and a bunch of other people were on, coming in and out. That's an impressive feat. And really quite a maestro of organization and getting everyone in there. I don't know how you guys do that, but we have like a full-time like coordinator and producer and everything, and I can't.
We can't do
I'm not
shit.
sophisticated enough for this.
Thank you, man. It was definitely something, and it just thank you for coming, and shout out to someone's alarm. It's late right now.
Sick! I think my house is finally on fire.
The timing was great, but yeah, man, it was just cool just to see everyone come together and have respectful discourse. And I'm very proud of that. And you were amazing. Everybody that came through was amazing. We need more of it. And I love that type of stuff.
I agree. So I'm going to try to invoke you today by keeping this organized. I'll keep with the Dukes first. I kind of just want to Maddie's point, I guess I'll start with you, Maddie, is I want to take everyone's temperature to see how everyone's feeling. We've had a few days now, some time to reflect. I don't know that my point of view has really changed very much, to be honest, in that time, but I know some people have kind of, eased into a certain thing or whatever. What is going on over there? Oh my God.
Chris's house is literally burning down.
It's all right. I thought it was a stroke earlier, but I'm happy to. I'm glad it's actually a blaze.
Good. Okay.
I got people in the house figuring it out. Probably.
This is
Hopefully.
This is fine. Fair enough. So Maddie, anyway, I don't need to pontificate here. How are you feeling? Like, what are your feelings about this? Good or bad?
Yeah, I'd say my thoughts are like yours. They've roughly stayed the same. If there is any fresh take I could offer for those who've listened intently to Defining Duke, the videos I've made subsequently, tweets, like just tracked it. I think the most recent development in my thoughts is, I'm okay mostly with this acquisition. I do have some lingering concerns. We'll get into them. I want to see Xbox start to build now, though. I think the time has come. They made the initiative. It's been a while since we've seen anything from them at all, like even in news, really just movement on the front of like, oh, we're bringing in Crystal Dynamics, which brought this conversation of is this the right or wrong thing to do for a brand new studio? But, I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but in the terms of new development, I do want to see Xbox start to build now. I thought you already had the pieces assembled through the Bethesda acquisition. Now you're more than taken care of. And it's because I was listening to, funny enough, Sacred Symbols, and Colin, kind of what you said about, PlayStation and their ability to build mascots is something we've always commended on Defining Duke. Like, I love Sly Cooper, Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. Like, those to me were like iconic PlayStation figures that are still in a lot of ways relevant nowadays, especially Ratchet and Clank amongst those three. And Xbox doesn't really, outside of Chief and I'd say Dom or Marcus, sorry, you really don't have that. And I want to see them start to build up those IP, not just inherit others. But otherwise, I thought this was a smart move for them, and we'll get into that more as time goes on.
Fair enough. Blinks. The timekeeper also a shout out to Blinks.
Yes.
Ooh.
Cog, how are you feeling? What's your temperature right now on everything that's happened? You heard, especially on your show, you were there the whole time. So you heard just a cacophony, a symphony of different ideas. I wonder where you stand now.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like I'm still in the same position. I will say, listening to Sacred Symbols and you guys definitely opened me up to long-term ramifications and at least to be cognizant of it, right? Just to, not everything is sunshine and rainbows, but, overall, I think my theme has been net positive. That's where I'm kind of sitting at. And not everything's perfect, but, it's one of those cataclysmic events we'll look back. I think it's an inflection point in gaming and we'll see how it goes from there. But my gut still says net positive, and we'll break this thing down 1,000, times as we go forward. But right now, that's where I'm still sitting.
Right on. All right, let's go over to you, Chris. How are you? How are you feeling? Is everything? First of all, you're alive still. I've come over to you now. You're not a light.
Yeah.
What's your feeling now that we've settled? We've done a couple shows and thought about it.
Yeah, I think I think of the three of us, I think I was always, at least on this position, probably the least gung ho about, this is a bad thing necessarily. I kind of like to think that I see kind of every path for this to go. I see the negative path. I see the positive path. I think it's a good thing that Microsoft has this kind of freedom with their money to kind of set a lot of the IP and studios under Activision free to do what they otherwise would not have done. I think this acquisition brings old IP like Crash and Spyro probably back into the limelight where they otherwise probably wouldn't have been. They probably would have just, hey, here was Crash 4, here's CTR, here's the Spyro Reignited trilogy, now Call of Duty time. And that's kind of up for debate now. I don't know if that's necessarily how that's going to go down. And I think there's positives there. But on the other side, I look at cinema and I look at Disney and I look at just the anxiety that creates whenever Disney goes like, hey, we own Fox and your parents. And like there is an air of discomfort there when a sizable percentage of box office earnings are from the same company. And while I don't think Microsoft's acquisition of Activision necessarily puts them in as much of a monopolistic position as Disney, I do think that feeling is still valid. And I think at this point, especially after Bethesda and after this, and just the sheer price tag of this deal, the eyes are going to be on Microsoft as far as antitrust shit, as far as monopoly style shit, because they're not there yet. Because again, Disney is way ahead of them, and they're apparently not there yet either. So they've got a ways to go, but that's the lens that people are looking at this conversation through, and I think that's totally fair. And I think it's also totally fair to kind of look at the situation where it's like, well, Activision was making games for everybody, and now there are some games that used to be for everybody that now probably won't be. I'm still very, very mixed on it. I'm happy from a selfish reason, because I'm going to get more Crash, I'm going to get more Spyro. But overall, it's just an uncomfortable feeling to see Microsoft just barging in here and just being like, yeah, we own everything now.
I will say real quick, just before I kick it over to Dustin, about the economic ramifications in terms of the SEC and others getting involved. You know, Hogue is the one who said this, and I wanted to just elaborate that I think people are misunderstanding the monopolistic take on it. Not that they would monopolize gaming, but that they have a vertical monopoly in their own way. And what that simply means, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, is that from stem to stern, they never have to leave their organization. From the very genesis of an item until the sale, it never leaves Microsoft. And that is a vertical monopoly, and that's a different sort of antitrust concern. It's the same kind of concern that people have about Amazon, because what Amazon does, for instance, is they'll see like, oh, this tchotchke is really popular. We'll copy the tchotchke, sell it for $1 less, promote our own searches, and then we just remove them. And that's a vertical organization. So I just wanted to say that I think that needs to be clarified for people. Dustin, how are you feeling now that we've had time to rest my baby boy?
I feel like we've been able to start to filter out, not just from other people, but even ourselves, the difference between hypothesis, hyperbole, and different angles. And I think the main thing over this, it's not even been a full week. I guess it is a week today, right?
Yes.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Or it feels like it's just been one day for me.
Time makes no sense anymore.
No,
but
I agree.
I think that the way I'm trying to look at it now is like, you see all these takes out there, and these takes are from obviously different perspectives. You have the consumer side, you have the business side, but in addition, there's multiple layers of those two takes where there's short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And so from the sacred symbols perspective of where we were looking at things in that episode, which I think that pretty much we can stand by a lot of those things, is just that our mindset is very much on a large scale business perspective, and not everyone has that as their top priority or their top level of analysis. And that's fine. Because I think there is a lot of points that are being put out there that are extremely valid, that maybe we mentioned on our show, but didn't necessarily give it the credence, specifically thinking about how people at Activision Blizzard, the developers there, may view this as a lifeline, right?
I agree with you there. We didn't give that enough credence.
Yeah. And I think that that's an amazing point worth mentioning. And I think the other thing worth mentioning is that with Activision Blizzard going out and shopping themselves out, I guess we should be glad that it is Microsoft and not Tencent in this situation. So that's another angle to look at it. At the same time, though, I am seeing some aspects that I just am, when I feel like when we really think about it, like, sure, I saw, Phil made his statement about digging into the old IP and stuff that they own. And I'm like, okay, what about like Banjo-Kazooie? How have you done a good job taking care of that favorite IP?
Or Perfect Dark and all this. Yeah, definitely.
It's an easy thing to throw out as a PR move, but like if we stop and think about the history, and it's not that Xbox has ruined every IP. I'm not saying that, or things that they've owned, but they've sat on stuff too that people have desperately wanted. So to throw this out is like, get excited for maybe the Guitar Hero. It's like, let's take it easy for a
Yeah,
second.
that was a bit weird. The Guitar Hero thing. I was like, I don't think anybody really like.
See, remember
like,
we tried. I mean, I always say I was totally optimistic that would actually succeed when they brought it back, and I was completely wrong about that.
Right.
But you bring up a lot of positive, and I wanted to focus on that as well and I want to focus on that first because my only real frustration in the entire situation, apart from just what it is some stuff you just can't fix. Like, I can't have a conversation or talk to someone who thinks that it's the same, that buying Bethesda is the same as buying Blue Point Games, right? Like, I can't. These are the kinds of things that are frustrating me about it, where I'm like, these are just, you got to understand. Well, you have to actually go back to this rudimentary stuff if you really think those are the same. But the thing is that I don't think and I'm straw manning, of course, but I don't think you think they're the same, right? And so that's kind of my frustration. Is it seems to be much more. The maxim seems to be like, we're winning, and so we're going to rub it in and all of that, and that's frustrating because I don't feel like anything productive can really come from that if you're like going to pretend that these things are all the same. So that's my only frustration. But certainly there are things that I feel like are negative, or what I would say are ominous. Not so much negative, but ominous. And then there's certainly a lot of positive. And you brought it up, Dustin, which is, I think, the liberation of the IP. Now, I think there is a lot of wishful thinking about this. I want to like kind of pump the brakes about that. There is, and I want to be really clear, no way Microsoft is letting all of those teams stop making Call of Duty. No way is that going to happen. Now, they might give everyone a rest. They might spin teams off internally, very much like they've done with Obsidian, where they have like a bunch of people working on different things, certainly within Bethesda game studios. But I think there's some wishful thinking that Microsoft is like, yeah, we'll take Call of Duty. We're going to just put Call of Duty away. It's the biggest thing ever in games. And all the studios that make Call of Duty, we're just going to let them all make something else. It's like, I don't think so. So within that wishful thinking, though, I think is a lot of positivity, which is, yeah, there are some really cool IP that are going to be unlocked. Some of them incongruent with where they're going to end up. I mean, certainly Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, if I were Microsoft, I would keep those all to ourselves, even though I think that they're going to keep Call of Duty and other things for everyone. I think Diablo and other things will also come to PlayStation. But I'm wondering, and we'll start with Maddie again, what's the positive, the most positive essence out of this? So I think the liberation of these IP, even though under a lot of weight of wishful thinking, is still releasing a lot of people's ability to dream of these new games. I would certainly love Singularity to come back. I was a big Raven fan back in the day because of games like that. And I also think that, yeah, the studios will be able to get out of this uncomfortable situation. I've heard nothing. I know a lot of people that work at Xbox. They love working there. So I have no reason to believe that the culture will be worse. It'll probably be significantly better. And again, Dustin is right. We should have, I think, given that more weight and more credence. But I also think that even the very positive thing of the IP liberation and the studios kind of getting out is still, I'm still skeptical of all of that, because Dustin brings up the big point of, look at Rare. I mean,
yes,
it took them
absolutely.
16 years to make a consequential game in Sea of Thieves. 16 years it took them to make a game that anyone really, truly cared about. And by the way, Microsoft paid almost twice as much for Rare in 2002 as Sony paid for Insomniac. So they wasted money. That was not a good deal. And so there is some skepticism to be brought along with that, maybe reality, but maybe things are different now. So anyway, I'm talking a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Like, I think on a people front, this is going to be Xbox's biggest challenge. This is going to be their real test as the cleanup crew. Because I think that's priority number one. Like, if you take care of the people working on these games, likely I think you'll see better output. I do agree that, it's a double-edged sword. Like, there's a lot of optimism in the idea that they'll actually follow through with reviving a lot of these IP. It's something I brought up with COG, which is that now Xbox has the issue of almost too many dead IP to manage. I went down like a quick list of prototypes: Spyro, Banjo, Singularity, some of their own Killer Instinct.
We don't
some
need
of
prototypes. We don't need prototypes.
You don't like
prototypes? You
prototype?
guys can have that one on Game Pass.
How dare you?
I'm telling you.
You guys keep that one. Yeah.
Let's say they think about it, though, right? That's on the list. You inherit some dead IP from Bethesda, like Dishonored is pretty much dead at this point because of the success of Deathloop and now maybe Redfall. I think Prey is going to be dead and gone for a while. So what happens is when you look at what they've gotten from Activision, and then you look at them saying, well, we're not done yet. This list of dead IP will only grow and grow and grow, where someone somewhere along the road, I always use the example myself as a Fallout fan, you get left out. Your series is to the side now. And now Xbox has the ability to react, tap into trends, and activate an IP for a particular crowd at a particular time. So for me, it's like that to me would be one of the most exciting parts. It's like, yes, they got all these IP, but it's like you've already, as Dustin put it, Colin, as you reiterated, it's like you already had dead IP that we wanted. Like I've been calling for a Banjo remake since this show started with Defining Duke. I was like, now's the time. Remakes are popular. Bring back a mascot platformer. Like this is the time. And, they're just leaving him dead and gone. Everwild, who knows what the fuck's happening with that? So that's the problem is they have a lot of great IP, but I don't think they manage them that well. And that's a problem that's only going to grow. So that's why I say the best thing that could come out of this is you fix the studio talent, you fix the culture, and from that, maybe working conditions ease, you get more production, you do kind of, Obsidian was a fantastic example, Colin, because it's what I was thinking of. You kind of break up, let these smaller teams experiment, do things. So that's one thing I always commend Xbox for. Is like Obsidian, they could absolutely roll into a fuck you, you're making Fallout powerhouse type team. Like we don't care about Avowed, we don't care about Grounded. These are cool little games, but Fallout's the money. I respect that they actually let them experiment. And so that's the good thing that comes out of this. Because if you're going to like have a couple of set Call of Duty teams like Infinity Ward, Sledgehammer, and Treyarch, that's fine. But I think Raven Software should be out of that. Like I'm with you. I think they got to be out of there. They've been making amazing games for as long as I can remember. Back to Marvel Ultimate Alliance even. Like they've just been for ages.
Wolverine as well. That Wolverine game was awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Like they've made amazing games for as long as I can remember. Like they deserve to be out on their own. I think Beanox to an extent, like they got burnt out on Spider-Man games, but that's another great developer that Activision just rolled into the cycle and no one talked about because their last Spider-Man game, Amazing Spider-Man 2, was terrible. So like people are like, yeah, go. We don't care. But they forget before that like Beanox was making the first Amazing Spider-Man. They made Shattered Dimensions. So long story short, yeah, this is a thing where I think you fix the culture, you fix the people problem, and I think the rest trickles down. And we're hopeful that the right IP get revived and Xbox can figure out a way to manage all these. But the reality that people got to accept, even though you're asking for optimism, Colin, I do apologize, is...
Oh, it's all good.
You're
apologizing to me about not giving me optimism.
Because I know the topic was supposed to be positively skewed. But I guess what I'm trying to prepare people for mentally, if I could, is something you love will get left behind here, more than likely.
Yeah.
Certainly. Yeah, very well said. Again, it goes back because even with this idea of liberating Raven, it's like, yeah, but aren't they like a major reason why Warzone is so big? Like all their work on that. This is I think a bigger conundrum than just move. We're acting like generals at, like with those old generals with the sticks pushing the things around the maps, but really it's just way more complicated. I think that's why I'm not skeptical, but why I think people need to realize like the first thing and the most important thing that Microsoft bought is Call of Duty and everything that comes along with it. Mm-hmm. That I think is like the biggest part of it. I think everything else is almost it's ancillary to compare to that. So how that's all going to structure and work, especially who knows what the contracts are. I was thinking about, if Sony putting out the statement saying like we expect them to abide by their contracts. It's possible. I don't know if it's true, but it's possible Activision signed a deal to say like we're going to bring Call of Duty to PlayStation until 2030 or something. In which case you just bought that entire deal, and they might. I've made the argument Microsoft's not going to mind that at all. But it just makes it more complicated, and why I think Call of Duty is probably not going anywhere. Cog, what do you think about? Well, what's one thing you always have a more positive disposition generally, which I'm thankful for because I can only take so much of myself. But what is your positive takeaway about, or one of the positive takeaways about this that we haven't touched on yet, or maybe something you want to reinforce that really sticks out to you above all else?
For me, it's a reinforcement of a vision of a generation to me that was like severely lost for them, and they bet on themselves, whether it be with their war chest or not. They bet on themselves to stay in the game. And what I mean by it is because, during that Xbox One generation, me and Maddie's had that conversation. I can't wait. I'm going to plug it again, Maddie. When we do that Xbox One retrospective, I cannot wait because, they were fundamentally beaten on every level. They didn't seem to understand what their core base wanted after the 360. And not only that, they were embarrassed on many levels, and they were almost aggressively forward thinking where they lost sight of their base. They really, even, I mean, we had Graham Smith on for Drinkbox. We've got some gems there. about, how difficult it was for the indie scene to get going, whereas PlayStation 4 was the darling. You had titles like Resogun, you had all these great games, and it was just like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? So for me, I remember hearing about the Game Pass thing and, we're going to be the Netflix of gaming. And I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. But I was very skeptical. I don't know what this means. How is this going to work? Right. And then the whole digital future thing. But what I say all that to say this, to bring it forward to positivity, is that what we're seeing is, I remember that era, and internally there was the name. They were always floated around. It was Terry Myerson. Right. And at that time, Xbox did not have a seat at the table. They did not, Microsoft did not view them as worthy to invest in. So I know a lot of times Phil is deified and so on and so forth, but one of the greatest things towards the end, in the mid-cycle of the Xbox One generation, is to really, okay, we got to fix the power thing. We got to get rid of this damn spy camera. We got to get rid, we got to do all these things, right? To get this and show a focus to games. And where it started for me was the game studios, Xbox game studios. Xbox, we're going to stop relying on second party deals and time, because we don't own anything, right? We don't own anything. One of my favorite games is Rise, Son of Rome, right? It's not even afforded a sequel. It was one of those, it was, flawed. It was a quick time QTE waiting to happen, but it was a beautiful looking thing. I was impressed. I was like, all right, this is how you start off the generation. Let's go. So, the whole thing to me comes down to, okay, now you're investing in yourself, and it gets us to this point. Now, this is very aggressive, right? And they're going to have a lot to prove as far as what Maddie said, and management and stuff like that. But where it gives the hope is that they're in the fight of being into gaming. When Satya Nadella is in it, it's not lip service. You've got Phil Spencer getting them to actually take gaming seriously. And I think that Xbox One generation was a dire situation because hope was lost. They don't care about gaming. They're not really in it. This is some secondary thing. It's not really profiting now. We could get out the game. And I think that's why it's being celebrated, it's being cheered what's happening, because now for the first time, they are going to, the assumption, right, is that they potentially could get quality games into this service that they created, that they have to feed over the generation.
Yeah, very well said. Very interesting points. I think it's true that the argument that what did we expect them to do is almost what encapsulates that argument to me. Because a lot of people have been making that argument to me, like, well, what did you expect them to do? Like, eventually they're going to have to fight back somehow. It's not working in these other ways. They're trying this more aggressive acquisition. I was reading about their history of acquisitions and Microsoft's, and they buy everything. It's not that, and there's no insult to that. They bought PowerPoint, and they bought, Excel, and they bought MS-DOS. LinkedIn. Famously, they bought MS-DOS from a guy for like 50 grand. So they buy everything. And God, I love the history of Microsoft, hard drive and Pirates of Silicon Valley and all that stuff. So good and so interesting. But you can see the remnants of that even today. Mm-hmm. And I have no problem with it, but I think it's going to create a cultural issue there. And we'll definitely talk about that moving forward. But I love the positivity. Chris, what do you think is like the real positive takeaway that you want to talk about or reinforce?
I think, I don't know. I really feel, I know there's a lot of wishful thinking here as far as the dead IP and a lot of the things that they now own that they're now inevitably going to be sitting on, because like Maddie said, they only have so much room to make, eventually some of these series is going to go kind of by the wayside, and eventually like one thing's going to be the focus. But I think the main positive that I'm feeling, especially lately with Game Pass, and I think their more aggressive, their more aggressive actions on the front of acquisitions and feeding Game Passes, they kind of need content for Game Pass. So because of that, I really do feel like, yeah, they might not liberate Raven, but I don't actually necessarily think it's all that unreasonable to say, hey, maybe we do pull a team off Call of Duty and see what they want to do, just because we need more things. And I feel like that it's almost like this strange there's like a tinge of desperation there too, which is like kind of like amusingly negative, where we need stuff for this service. We need as much content as possible, but we don't want to put out clones. We don't necessarily want to be viewed as Gears, Halo, Forza, Gears, Halo, Forza. We don't want to put Treyarch on a Halo game. What we want to do is we want to see what these studios want to do internally and maybe give them the capital to kind of invest in that and maybe spread that around. It's why you saw something like Grounded out of Obsidian, which like I never would have thought that Obsidian would do that. But they were allowed to do that, and it gave content for Game Pass, and it gave the developers there who wanted to do something a little bit different the chance to do that. So I do think just the nature of what Game Pass is and the demanding nature of what a service is, combined with the sheer capital of Microsoft, and now combined with the sheer scale and wealth of IP that they now own under all of these different umbrellas, I think there's reason to expect that you're going to see Crash and Spyro be revived. I think there's reason to expect that maybe you'll see Vicarious Visions actually come back in a proper way. Because I think Microsoft, if there's one thing that they know, especially lately, it's PR. I think they managed to turn a $70 billion acquisition into something that everybody's cheering for in like a post-Disney like MCU era. You know what I mean? That's not like an easy thing to do. And they did it because they got in at the right time. They got, hey, here's Activision. They're a mess. They have a lot of IP, but they're floundering. People hate him. People hate this guy, Bobby Kotick, at the top. If we come in now, we'll get all of these IP. We'll have all of these ways to feed Game Pass. And we'll look like the hero. So I think they understand
Homelander Microsoft, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they know what people in the industry want, and I think they're more than happy to fulfill at least some of those requests. I don't think it's unreasonable that you might see a Vicarious Visions doing their own thing under Microsoft, because I think personally, if I was the head of Microsoft Gaming specifically, that's something that I would want. That's something that I would be like championing. Like Vicarious Visions is great. And it's a crime that them and Toys for Bob and all of these other fantastic studios that have had fantastic output over the last several generations are just now in the Call of Duty support factory, especially when, again, with this capital that Microsoft has, maybe Call of Duty doesn't need all of those extra developers. Maybe they can simply expand the studios that make it in the first place and not have things going outside and just constantly folding things under. I know that's, up in the air, given that they have weird deals with, Crystal Dynamics on whatever the hell Smilegate's doing. And even Remedy kind of coming in to do the single player of Crossfire X. And then there's definitely going to be some cross-pollination there. But I don't know. I do feel, even with the uncomfortability of the nature of such an acquisition and the monolithic feeling that kind of has over the industry, where Microsoft is kind of this Eye of Sauron, kind of looking out and just scanning for things to buy with its.
Why they gotta be the Sauron?
I don't think it's that bad. I think it could be pretty cool. Like I think we're gonna see like really cool IP come back. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not the ones we want necessarily, but I don't know. I think there was a conversation that we were having on the most recent episode of Sacred Symbols, where we were talking about the deleterious effect on creativity, and I don't know if I agree that that's the case for this particular acquisition. I think there's a lot to be let loose, and that's still wishful thinking. We still have no solid plans as to whether or not that will be fulfilled or not. But if I were Microsoft, I would see no reason not to fulfill that. It's just money. And they've just got all of it. So whatever.
Yeah, it's all very well said. I like your point about Vicarious Visions, especially. I wonder, who I was thinking about with this is Jen O'Neill, who used to lead Vicarious Visions, because she left and probably missed out on tens of millions of dollars in that buyout. And, as the lead of one of the studios, I wonder if they'll bring her back in. That's something that I would keep an eye on. The other point that I think you made, which I do agree with, and it's one of the exciting things, is that these studios, no doubt, Treyarch and Sledgehammer and others, are probably busting at the seams with ideas. They just can't execute on them. I would argue that you even keep them all making shooters, and you can really, I mean, you need vibrant shooters, regardless of what you get out of them. There's no doubt that there's people out there that want to do that stuff. I just don't know that you turn a studio like that. I don't know what the mechanics of that is or are. So that's one thing I would be curious to know more about. And of course, the Game Pass factory. We'll get to that as well and what that means. But Dustin, let's go to you to wrap this up. What's a positive thing you want to put a fine point on?
I think the most positive aspect for me is the positive aspect specifically for the workers, which I think I already mentioned that. So the angle I really want to go in is that the sinking ship of some of these IP, particularly for Blizzard, and I think more importantly, the communities fostered around these IP and the feeling of hopelessness that they may have had for many years now. Look at the just the absolute mass exodus away from World of Warcraft. Look at the downfall of Overwatch.
Mm-hmm.
Diablo fans, when they're told, "Don't you have a phone?" You know, like, the thing that where I really want to emphasize this aspect of community. Think about events like BlizzCon. Blizzard has, or at least at one point did have, something special going on with their brands and the people that like them. And obviously we talk about, we don't want to have a corporate worship or whatever, but I understand that these IPs go beyond that, and the communities they create when you're playing games online with other people, there's something special about that. And so particularly these last few years, like I mentioned, these IPs, some of these people probably feel very conflicted. If you grew up playing World of Warcraft, maybe the past 10 years, and you see the state that the game is in, and so your options are either to split off with what's left of your community and go to Final Fantasy, or stay and not have a good, like, there's no good option, or even Overwatch at the same time. I mean, people are not excited currently about Overwatch 2. People are not pleased at the direction. And just think about that game won Game of the Year. And look what's happened to it.
Preach.
And so to see those communities get a sense of hope that they may be taken care of in a better way, which I think Microsoft does do pretty well overall as far as their communities, and think about like Halo and Gears of War and stuff like that. So I think that's my main takeaway.
Yeah, fair enough. A lot of interesting stuff there. All right, let's get into the, like, not one negative thing each of us want to talk about. One thing that we're concerned about. I don't want to call it negative. Let's just call it a concern. The one thing I want to focus on just again is this idea that nothing happens in a vacuum. And people look at this purchase, or some people look at this purchase, and it's like a big stone thrown into a body of water. And it's like, yeah, the stone is meant for the deep, and it's going in the water, and the water has claimed it. And I'm like, that's awesome. But when the stone hit the water, it created this massive splash, and then these huge waves, and all of this stuff happened all around it. And even though the rock is descending to the deep and going exactly where it belongs, it doesn't mean that it's not affecting everything along the way. And I don't necessarily see a lot of open eyes about what consolidation means and what it does. And I'm so glad that it was brought up earlier about Netflix and all of these subscription services. I look at PlayStation, in my opinion, first party, more like HBO. And HBO to me has an identity. You might not like it. You might not like the identity. It's got a little bit of everything. You got Bill Maher on there. If you want a little politics, you obviously got Curb Your Enthusiasm, but they're really all about the drama. And Sony's all about the third person drama and story game. And so that to me means something. It doesn't mean they don't have Gran Turismo, and it doesn't mean that they don't have Ratchet and Clank or Knack or whatever they're trying to do next, right? It's just to say that they have an identity that's core to them. And moves like this create an arms race, as we named our last episode of Sacred, a very stupid arms race, because I hope that they don't feel compelled to break the mold, because what they've been doing is working. It's working for quality. It's working for the sales of their console. Yet it's inevitable that a major corporation like Microsoft making a move towards subscriptions is going to compel everyone to go towards subscriptions. And Cog, I said it to you on your show, and I'll say it here again, is that we all know that many people now say like, oh, I'll wait for it to come on Game Pass. Oh, maybe it'll come to Game Pass. Now we have a little bit of that in PlayStation, because a lot of people say like, oh, maybe it'll be a PlayStation Plus game. We have a little bit more in the PlayStation ecosystem of just waiting for price drops, because they just do that like instantaneously for some reason. But this concern I have as a developer of games and a co-owner of a studio is I don't want people to lose track of what a game is like what cost a game is to make, what its value is to the market, and that it's not just we're talking about them like it's just content, right? And it's true. It's fine. I mean, that's fine. People probably look at my games and they're like, yeah, this is fodder for Game Pass or whatever. And by the way, we're interested to go on Game Pass. We want to know how it works and how it could work for us. We're interested. But we're skeptical because we know at the end of the day that we were going to require sales, and we can't pretend that moves don't, whether inexorable moves like technological moves or corporate moves, have effects on everything around it. You know, think about the turn of the century with MP3s and the rise of peer-to-peer networks. And even though Apple was the one that really got control of that and started making money and started making coherent 99-cent songs, that was a huge deal back in the day for people that remember when the iPod first came out. It's still true. And I my best friend's a musician, so I hear a lot of lamenting about this is, you know, the music industry is screwed. It's horrible. The music industry. It's totally, he has a real deep knowledge of the industry. And he always says like, oh man, you know, when bands like Hatebreed and stuff back in the day, they would get like $1 million deals for their records. And he's like, these bands that were just because they wanted to try different things. They wanted to be creative and see what was next. And the removal of all of the way they used to sell records and albums, we might not miss that. And I certainly don't miss buying albums. I'm a Spotify fan all the way, but it's affected our favorite bands. Now they're relying on tour. Now they're relying on merch, and they kickstart their records and they go on Patreon and they do all these different things. It's affected them. We can't say that just because it's better, you know, just because we have Spotify, that it didn't affect everything. It did. It cost a lot to a lot of people. And that's the only thing that I want to say as the prevailing skepticism and where that comes from. It's not to say that Game Pass isn't a good idea. It's not to say that Microsoft isn't smart to make these moves. It's simply to say that it's not merely the rock falling into the deep. It's everything else that I care about that is on the line. And that's all so that's where I want to leave it. Maddie, let's go to you. Let's talk to you first. How do you feel about what do you think is what is a concern you want to highlight if you have one?
Yeah. Are we going to have a separate section for like Game Pass just as a conversation?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Game Pass.
I just want to make sure, because I do have that. I do have thoughts on that, but I want to, if I were to point out any concern for me, it's right now Xbox is under very strong leadership that are gamers. We've seen with 2 generations what that's like when you don't have gamers, Xbox One, and how that can almost dismantle you. And when you do have gamers, PS4, and how that can bring you higher. And now with the Series generation, having gamers as your leads clearly helps. I think it's undeniable. Of course, you need bean counters to do all the numbers and whatnot, but like creatives at the head of the industry is important. What I'm worried about is right now we see it. We talked a lot about IP, and I guess that's where a lot of the good and bad comes from it, in my opinion, where you have a lot of IP that can be used in fun ways. And right now, the current leadership is at least expressing interest in bringing some of these back, working around them a little bit. I think to throw the stone even deeper is to think about when the next era of Xbox leadership comes in. Mm-hmm. What is the mindset then? Because right now we're seeing them be used for good, even Halo to some extent. And Xbox, you know, I know they're very viewed benevolently, you know, they're deified, if you will. But they talk out of both sides of their mouth a little bit. They historically have. I always think back to Matt Booty, head of Xbox Game Studios, trying to say that Game Pass is not something that we use to change how games are made. We just want your games. And meanwhile, we talked to Graham Smith just last week, and he's like, yeah, Xbox came to us and said, by the way, you should put multiplayer in your game because we're putting it on Game Pass. It's like, we think it'd fit here. It's like, no, they know what makes Game Pass games work, because if you have a game that's cool and your friend sees the games that's cool, they'll sign up for Game Pass because that's easier to get people in. Like, so they have a history of just, we've even called Phil Spencer on it. Like, they talk out of both sides of their mouth pretty often. And that's in the good leadership. So when you have like true I've seen what's happened with Jim Ryan, right? Like he's just immediately upon the PS5 generation, like just under attack right away, right? Like just
He's also the worst. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not saying he's great, but I'm saying like he said some dumb shit, but like right away, this guy's a suit, fuck him. And I get it. I totally get it. And so
Who cares
I'm
about
worried
Gran
about
Turismo?
Yeah,
What was that?
exactly. Yeah. What did he say? Like we did that on the PS3, or he said like there was an older one that they did.
Yeah, he's
or,
like, who wants to play this or something
Yeah,
like that? I was like,
yeah.
oh my God, you rule. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. And I guess my worry to put it to a point is what happens when the gaming leads leave and the suits have returned. The new, the next era of Xbox. What's that like when your Sarah Bonds, your Aaron Greenbergs, your Phil Spencers are out, right? And of course, that's always going to be a problem for every company. But now we've given, I'd say, the right people in position some great tools to use, and we can enjoy a good era of Xbox. But then when the wrong people come in, they got a whole fucking playground to mess around with that can be potentially, I guess, dangerous, if you will. They've got access now to the biggest mobile game, and they're going to see that and go, well, look at what Candy Crush is doing. What can we do with Halo to Candy Crushify that? This Halo free-to-play game's doing well. What can we do over here in Gears and free-to-playify that? Like, I think once you start to bring the business minds in over time, this deal, which is I think has a lot of positive potential right now in this current leadership, can get morphed into something very bad if the wrong people come in down the line. So if I were to put one concern out there, it'd be that.
Yeah, very well said. Phil Spencer and company are going to need to become just absolute conductors of content. I mean, if they can align it all up, they're going to have some serious shit going on Game Pass in a few years. Once a month, once every month and a half, once every 2 months, big launches. I'm sure that's what they want. That's exactly what they have in mind. So very well said, though, about some of the concerns. Cog, what do you think? What's something we should talk about here that might be concerning you?
I think Maddie might be proud of me for this as a fellow Duke. And it's going against, what's the word, Colin? Myopic?
Yeah, myopic, right.
It's going against my own personal thing. Like, look, Maddie knows I'm team digital. I'm lazy. I don't want to change discs. I don't want to do, I'm just lazy. I love the convenience. I love it. But the reality is, I can't think just about myself selfishly. I got to think about games and physical games media and collection. And we had on Defining Duke, Halo Infinite, the disc is worthless. Like you put it in the disc and you cannot play the game without an Ethernet or a network connection. So, and then here's the thing. I am a huge fan of the Series S. I think it's portable. It's cool. Shout out to Betty. We bypass hotels.
Oh, yeah, the hotels.
We gonna talk about that. But at the end of the day, to get that thing at the Last Stand Media event to rock, but without a connection, like this thing is constantly doing some type of DRM check where I literally have to, if I don't have, Wi-Fi in the area, right, I'm going to have to connect my thing to a hotspot, right, on my phone. And there's a cool, I got to plug them a little bit. They got this cool Series S kind of like screen attachment. It's called like Upspec. I love it. And you see the, commercials, they're in the car. You're not doing that on the plane. Because that DRM is going to check. You are doing that on the car. That DRM is going to check. So I say all that to say this. The end game, as much as I love Game Pass, like ownership and God forbid, like Batty's talking about regime changes, what if the switch get flipped off for whatever reason? Like it's a reality, a scary reality that I got to deal with. And the last point I'll say that I've also thought about, and I'm definitely not on Team Monopoly. I'm totally agree with Chris. I don't think this, Monopoly either. But there's an aspect of the deal I think people are not realizing. And as much as I have wishful thinking for them in the PC space with Battle.net, because I'm a big Destiny fan. I loved how Battle.net run. I feel it was the smoothest experience on PC. I left Xbox One and I was like, I'm on PC for Destiny because I'm running 60 frames. I'm running this nice network, stable, everything. But the reality was, it was really cool. But now that they own that, in my mind, wishful thinking like, yo, PC Game Pass, you merge that thing in, you take WoW, whatever, the $15. That's wishful thinking. The reality is Valve is out there. And competitively, how does that work? They're gonna have some uphill battle from a competition standpoint, from a networking infrastructure standpoint, to say, okay, you own Battle.net. what happens? Do games get pulled off Steam? And now, like, Microsoft could be very aggressive there, and we don't know where the tendrils go in the PC space. I think overall it's better for them, but it creates a competitive balance that could be uncomfortable. And how does that play? So that's where I'm at with it. You know, it goes against the stuff I like with the digital, but I have to not be selfish and think about the greater good of how that affects gamers.
No, it's well said. I wonder in the effect of, well, I guess we'll talk about it because Maddie wanted to Maddie's point earlier, we should probably talk more specifically about Game Pass, but I do wonder about the online connectivity of Xbox's ecosystem. We were talking about it a little bit on our show about how this kind of alienates people, do, you know, as few as they are, I think, that do like to buy their games physically. It almost feels like they're ceding that to PlayStation, and I think even more to Switch. And that's a group that's worth pursuing. By the way, your fantasy of, I mean, I've been thinking about it. I was like, wow, you get WoW in there, you get all this different shit in a $15, $20 subscription. It's unbeatable. But we'll save all of that for the last thing I want to talk to everyone about. Let's move on to Chris. What is a kind of a concern you have that you want to underline for us?
I think my concern lies mostly in the effects that it has outside of Microsoft and Xbox. I think Microsoft and Xbox have a lot to gain from this. I think, even with the concern about Phil Spencer, like how long will he really be around? There's reason to believe that, he might be around for maybe one full Bethesda game, like these deals kind of don't really take effect for quite a while. Like Elder Scrolls is probably going to be around 2078 probably at this rate. So, he might be gone by then. I think that's a reasonable concern, but my concern is, I think, from other publishers or more specifically Sony, and like we went over on one of our previous episodes, just what it forces them to have to consider. One of the more positive aspects of Microsoft owning these things and not Tencent, and even in some cases not PlayStation, is that they actually exist in more than one ecosystem. They exist on Game Pass, they exist on the console, and they exist on PC. If Sony were to purchase, or if, I don't know, Nintendo were to purchase, or if other entities like Tencent, God forbid, were to purchase, then we'd have a pretty big, a bit of a different situation. We'd have those games that used to be going to PC on PlayStation. But now the issue is that Sony can't ignore this. So what will they decide to take away? Like, will they try to acquire something like Capcom? Like, will they try to acquire something like Square Enix? I don't think that's necessarily impossible. Will PlayStation itself be sold to Apple or Amazon or these other companies that kind of want to get involved in some way? We've seen Apple try their Apple Arcade. We've seen Amazon try whatever the hell that thing is that they're doing, that streaming thing. What is that? You guys even know?
No, I don't.
They're doing some
one?
Luna.
It's like Luna. Right.
Oh,
they're trying.
Yeah,
they're trying, and that's imagine being like more forgettable than Stadia. But you have these companies really trying to get in there, and if they see Microsoft just sort of acquiring something as big as Activision Blizzard and Bethesda with such a hefty price tag in the news, there's no doubt conversations, or at the very least the bubblings of or the rumblings of conversations at Apple and at Amazon, like, Sony's looking pretty valuable. And do we want that? Do we want the Amazon PlayStation? I don't I don't want an Apple PlayStation. I don't want these things. I kind of like the independent nature of a lot of these things. Granted, Microsoft has always been the big one, but they were always the odd man out, and I would hate to see that odd man out kind of nature just kind of become the norm, where everything is just sort of owned by these three dudes in suits, just trading off millions and billions of dollars with each other, just deciding like, maybe I want that now. Maybe that doesn't go on Xbox anymore. You know, maybe that doesn't go on. Maybe you'll never get another Marvel vs. Capcom on an Xbox console. You know, I don't want that. I think that's really limiting, and I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you in the sense that you can see a coin flip situation where Sony stays the course or they retaliate, or you don't want to call it retaliation, but they answer. And if that happened and they went like, well, fine, we're just taking Square Enix, we're just taking Capcom, we're just taking Konami and all of those, or any of those, that would be bad. But I guess on one hand, with everyone celebrating, or a lot of people celebrating, be like, well, this is what you asked for, right? And no offense, I mean, it's cool. You can have World of Warcraft and Overwatch and all these things. They're huge, but Colin Moriarty wants the Japanese role-playing games, and he wants the indie games, and he wants all that kind of stuff. So again, that's why I keep calling myself Neo, where for now, I'm just ducking all of the bullets that are being shot out of the helicopter at me. And so one thing, though, going into what Cog said too, and we were talking about all of the different availability of games, is Steam, and I think Cog is right here about this, is like this mysterious entity that could one day just be like, we're doing a Game Pass. Yeah. And how does that work? I don't even know what the mechanics of that are. And that would suck too. I would hate that, because I love their whole libertarian mantra where they're like, it's reviews by the critics. It tells you exactly how many hours you played, the user reviews, the forums. It is a masterclass of how you run a community. PlayStation can learn a lot. Lots of good sales too. Exactly. It's just a wonderful marketplace. I don't actually use it very much. I use it so seldom that I think I have like 3 different Steam accounts now, because I just make a new one every time I go on. Nonetheless, Dustin, what do you think as far as underlining a concern?
I think that the line of thinking that I had was really close to Chris, and that he was mentioning about Sony either being bought or buying up companies. And I'm just thinking about even new players entering the space as well. Amazon has already been flirting with this idea for a very long time, and
Lumberyard is there. Lumberyard is like totally I mean, they had an idea to get this big ass engine in the works, and it's not working for them, you know.
Right. And so you think about Xbox, and that the documentary long ago, they talk about how Bill Gates did not want Sony to control this vertical. They didn't want them to be in control of the living room. Maybe Amazon's thinking that right now. Maybe Apple's thinking that right now. It's like, man, this is a huge market. We either get in right now or we don't. And in some sense, maybe more competition is good for us as the consumer. But at the same time, we're talking about companies like Amazon, which I don't know. I'm part of the problem. I have Amazon Prime and use their services. But at the same time, it's the evil that we let in the house at the same time. So there's that aspect. And then the other thing I was just thinking is that we've talked about Sony's response. What does that look like? Do they buy Capcom? Do they buy a big publisher? And I think one of the most obvious responses, which I don't think we mentioned on Sacred Symbols, and I haven't heard people say, is that I see them buying up more timed exclusives. That's easy for them to do and inexpensive. And
I have this feeling BioShock is timed, like this. Yeah, this weird feeling about that. That's not confirmed, but I not just a suspicion I have.
Yeah, so it's just like, and it's frustrating. I don't know. The thing is, for us as content creators, we see things people say that we said or opinions or whatever, and I see a lot of people talking about Sacred Symbols, how we've cheered on third-party exclusives, and I'm like, tell me when that happened. People like a tweet where Colin said, Final Fantasy 16 is exclusive. Nuts. It's like, yeah, that is nuts. That's not necessarily like yippee for not letting other people.
It was nuts. I couldn't believe when I saw it. Like, really? That's that's a 200. That's probably it's $100 million, $150 million buy. Probably.
Yeah. When you were on ILP, I had to make a statement and shut it down because people were running with that, and I'm like, Colin does not believe in that. Like, I don't know where you guys are getting that from, but good point, Dustin.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, Cog, to that point, and Dustin, is that the third party exclusive, like, what was Ninja Gaiden during the Xbox era, the original Xbox era? What was BioShock? What was Mass Effect? What was Titanfall?
Right.
You know, what were these games? I don't understand. Like, what was Blue Dragon? Like and Sunset Overdrive and all, you know, these mixtures of second party games where they were not buying the IP, so they were working very loosely with studios. That was a mistake. That's not a mistake, Sony made. You know,
I agree
and
with that.
so now it's interesting because I always use Braid as an example of this, where Braid was pitched to PlayStation and Sony could have had it. And they were like, we are not publishing this without the IP. And they're like, no, we'll keep the IP. And they went to Xbox. Now, that was a very shrewd move of theirs, but Sony just didn't stop doing that. They own everything that these different studios had done, which is why buying them and folding them in. It's like, look at Insomniac. They're a husk without Sony, basically. They own almost nothing. Fuse and Sunset Overdrive, basically, and whatever that underwater Metroidvania they did. So the only point is that Microsoft also did this stuff. They did it a lot. I remember playing BioShock on an Xbox 360. I remember playing Mass Effect. I played Mass Effect, the first 3 Mass Effect games, on an Xbox 360.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
right.
Well, the first two.
The first two.
The third one came out at the same time.
Right.
So anyway, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say, like, that is annoying me too, because I feel like it shows just a total lack of knowledge of history of the industry. It's just, I don't know, man. What was Shadow Complex? I can go on and on. Anyway.
Right. So the thing, I guess the argument could be made is that Sony's particular type of, like, a move like Final Fantasy, you have Final Fantasy fans on Xbox, albeit a much smaller amount if you look at the sales of Final Fantasy 15 on Xbox versus PlayStation, but they are there, and you're taking that away from them, and we don't like that. Like, that's something I feel like we've been clear on, is that third-party exclusives suck for the people that are on the losing end, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But the problem is that it is effective. It works. It makes your platform more desirable, particularly when you have a strong IP and you gate it off. And I see Sony in this situation where they're like, well, we can't necessarily fight with fire like Xbox is doing right now, but you know what we can do? We can go sign up a bunch of deals that keep these games, certain third-party games, off of Xbox. And again, it's been effective. Stuff like Street Fighter V, never released on Xbox. Probably single-handedly killed the fighting game community on that platform. It was effective. It sucks. I would expect them to do that even more.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't it weird remember when Persona 4 Arena came to Xbox 360? And everyone was like, what? Like, that's the one you're going to release? The one that no one has any context for?
It all happened again with, or it almost happened again with they're re-releasing Ultimax now. And now Nintendo fans are like the ones who are been begging for Persona 4 Golden to be ported. And they're like, you're going to bring us Ultimax, this sequel to the fighting game that we never even got, but like, there's no Persona 4 to follow it up. Like, Persona 4 weird Golden. How Atlas is just a weird company in general.
I agree. They are. There's no doubt. I think Persona 4 Golden is going to be leaving PC and Vita this year and going to other things. Yeah. But it's an interesting point, or a series of points you make, Dustin, about, fighting fire with fire might not be possible. It's just the third-party exclusive thing. I feel like that's such a weird argument. Like, that's an argument I didn't expect. Just because I brought up on ILP when I was there that it was Xbox that revived the third-party exclusive. It wasn't Sony. Sony was fine actually not doing it anymore. They were making second-party, like I said, owned IP. Every once in a while, they would let one of those games go. Like, they didn't end up releasing Wild. Remember that game, Wild? Remember Me was supposed to be a PlayStation exclusive that Capcom ended up picking up and putting on Xbox. So it didn't always work out, but they were happy not doing that. It was Titanfall and Rise of the Tomb Raider and all these other games that revived the third-party exclusive. And that was one thing everyone was for sure thought was dead. So that argument is a little weird to me, but I want to go to everyone one more time as we wrap up. I know you guys have other things to do. I have nothing else to do. So you're good. But let's go around. Maddie, I promised that we would talk about Game Pass. I want to just see how everyone feels now about like the value of Game Pass, maybe what the pricing is going to look like. Now, I saw Jeff Grubb and others writing about this. It's very cute, but Colin Moriarty's been saying for 2 years that Game Pass would eventually come to PlayStation. Now, this seems to be a very en vogue sort of statement because people would ask, like, people would say, like, "Oh, do you think the Elder Scrolls 6 will be on PlayStation?" And I'm like, yes, because I think Game Pass will be on PlayStation. So I think that it'll be on PlayStation. I don't think it's going to be like a natural release necessarily. But I look at Game Pass as a really valuable thing. 25 million subscribers. We're unsure how many people are paying full price. I gave my own anecdote about how I'm not. I'm sure a lot of people aren't, but I'm sure a lot of people are. I feel like that $15 price point is low. Here's one of the things I want to ask you, Maddie, too. And Cog, I was listening to some of what you were saying about this, and I think you're of one mind, and I'm split on this, which is, and I actually wrote this down in a flow chart. Mojang, or Minecraft, right? they bought that and they're like, and then everyone's like, of course that's going to stay on PlayStation. It's too much money, right? Okay. Then a few years later, it's not a few years, it's a handful of years later, Bethesda. And that's for 3 times more money, 2.5 times more money. And everyone's like, well, that's too much money. Of course they bought that for Game Pass. I'm like, but that's the exact opposite argument. Now we have Activision for many times more money. And I don't know what it means. Like, I don't know if that much money means you are all in on Game Pass or if that much money means we have to hedge as much as possible. So Maddie, give us some of your thoughts as we close up about, Game Pass and where that leaves everything for the service, because obviously it is the big winner.
Yeah. On a pricing front, it's funny. I was waiting for a deal like this to sort of be the backbreaker. Like, okay, we've invested big. Here come the games. Here come the exclusives. Like 2023 is where we're really going to start to see, I think, the beginning of the drip feed of quarterly content. And I've been anticipating for a while, like, oh, they'll do a backbreaker deal, something like this. And boom, like there's the price hike. It still has yet to come. I think it's inevitable. Netflix is a good example of just boop, 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 up it goes. Just keep going up.
And I just keep paying it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I just think with like gaming being such an expensive hobby, expensive to develop for, the development prices keep going up. And they're not only bringing these games on, but they're like paying a ton of money to get them on. And Phil's come out on a multitude of occasions and said like, yeah, it's this kind of self-sustaining thing. He claims it's separate from Xbox. We can tell as much because of the verbiage he used. Like when they bought Bethesda, he goes, this is for getting games to where Game Pass exists, which means it could be anywhere. Like Colin said, it could be PlayStation. To that note, I wasn't really crazy on the idea. Not crazy. It sounds like I'm against it, but I wasn't a believer, would probably be the best term, of Game Pass coming to PlayStation because I never thought a deal like this was possible, right? I thought Call of Duty's too big. What's interesting now, and I wonder if this was their plan all along, is we saw during the Epic and Apple court case, there's a leaked email, Phil Spencer saying to Tim Sweeney, he was like, we haven't given up yet on getting Game Pass on other platforms. We started to see how xCloud works, where even now on the Series consoles, the Xbox One, you can just, before you even download it, stream it, see if you like it, then download it. So we're seeing that accessibility is going across a ton of devices. And I'm wondering if this deal, more than anything, when it came across the table for Phil, is this the bargaining chip we need to start to get PlayStation to, I put this in quotes, bend the knee? Do we get Game Pass on PlayStation? Because I view it as almost like Nintendo will be their test run. We're going to do Nintendo first. They've teased that. It's inevitable. Like they've teased that shelf so many times. Yeah, that shelf. You've got a literal studio set with a Microsoft exec sitting there with a fucking Switch in the background. Like you can't tell me nothing is happening there.
What's with him and all of his symbolism is the
self-watch.
Yeah, it's
I'm telling you, man. Like Jesus. They love the tease. But I feel like Nintendo's going to be that test run because now they've got the games. You bring them to Nintendo, you show the handshake, like hey, look, we're doing well. And you bring that to PlayStation, look, we want your games. That's what it's going to be. We want your games. Like you've got Spider-Man, you've got Final Fantasy, you've got X, Y, and Z, Persona. Like you solve our Japanese games issue. We have the answer to everything you used to have. That's the thing that's kind of fucked about this. It's not like Microsoft. It's why I started off like I want them to build stuff because it's not like Microsoft built stuff and then inherited it like PlayStation did. They just effectively said like, oh, Call of Duty, it's ours now. Like they just ripped it off the market. So PlayStation knew what it was like to have the number one selling game of 2021, where both entries of the last 2 Call of Duties were the top 2 selling titles. Like they know what that's like. It's a known quantity. So now Microsoft can come to them and be like, well, you want that, right? All right, like here's Game Pass. Here's all of our first party games, including Activision. We'll put it in a package. We'll call it something else. We'll put the app on your system. Maybe you'll give us Spartacus. We like those PS1 to 3 games there. Like, we want to check those out. We want our fans to do that. If this, to me, is like the backbreaker that sort of mows down the walls of this console tribalism bullshit, I'm almost for it. Because then it's like, well, now we're just playing wherever, kind of like how PC's been doing. And we can start to have, I think, more genuine conversations. But, because I look at, like, the quiet things that happen behind closed doors. It's one that I don't see a lot talked about, and I get why. It's like it's just a little JRPG, one that I love. But Octopath Traveler went to Xbox. This was a Nintendo Switch exclusive. They did bring it to PC, but then quietly, like they dropped it on Game Pass. They made a console port for it. Like that doesn't just happen. So these companies are already talking about like bringing these games to places. And I'm wondering if like now that Xbox has inherited so many known IP, not built their own things that have built their own brand, but things that like all gamers know, that you can bring Jim Ryan to the table and be like, okay, let's talk about Game Pass on your console now. If that's the goal, I'm kind of for it. Like, all right, okay, like it's unfair to PlayStation fans because, again, it's something they already knew they had. They knew Bethesda games, they knew Activision games, so they're paying for a thing they already knew in a subscription service, and subscription services are already a pain in the ass. But on the other hand, I guess in reverse for Xbox players to maybe get PlayStation games, that could be kind of cool too. Again, it's what I said at the top of this, which is there's a lot of flanks to these arguments. I don't think there's one true answer that's good or bad. There's a lot of openings here and a lot of interpretation that has to be done because, as Colin said, like the numbers we're dealing with here are seismic. Like we went from the week before, Take-Two bought Zynga, $13 billion, I think it was. It's like, oh shit, that's the biggest deal. Fuck that. Never mind. We're talking $68.7 billion now. We're talking almost, I think, 4 times that amount, roughly. Paper napkin math here. So
they could have paid $300 million more and had the perfect gamer number.
Yes. I wonder if they did that. Maybe that was the discount that Activision gave them for all the shit they've put them through. But I'm rambling at this point. I guess to me, it's just if Xbox can use this as a bargaining chip, it'll be very interesting. Maybe I say that as a pundit, if you will. Like it's just fascinating to watch the industry in motion. I love it. But I think if gamers can get access to more stuff, then that's good for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Kind of a blue skies look at it, which I don't really mind because I agree with you that the Octopath Traveler thing's a great point. When I saw that leak, because it leaked through Game Pass that it was coming, I was like, oh, awesome. And I kept refreshing PSN profiles every day, expecting the trophy list to pop up. And you kind of saw it. I was like, oh, I see what you're doing. It is like one of those silent things between, it's a Square Enix obviously published game, but Nintendo obviously funded it and now they're letting it go to Microsoft. It's very similar to Ori and some of the xCloud stuff, and they're playing around. So I totally agree. I'll really be interested to see how valuable Switch becomes for people when Game Pass is on there. I don't think it's if. Cog, what do you want to underline for Game Pass and in the future and the pricing? I mean, how do you want to kind of leave things here?
I mean, for me, it's like 2 mindsets. I look at the start of this generation for them, and I just think I feel they've learned a lot from their mistakes. I feel personally that they've positioned themselves as probably one of the most pro-consumer launches of a console, especially specifically with the Series S. And they're looking to go after a casual market that they lost. I know people. It's just Call of Duty, Madden, and 2K, bro. Right. Like, I know those guys. You know what I'm saying? I hang with them. So it's just like, those are the guys. I think sometimes the reality is, as the hardcore gamer, we sometimes overstate and think that sometimes we're in our little echo chamber and we overstate. And I think that those guys kind of run things. I'm not a Fortnite guy. I'm not any of that, right? And that's where the market to me is going. So I just look at it like the winds of change on some level. But as far as Game Pass specifically, I look at them positioning themselves to that guy. Oh, I could walk in, I can get COD 70, but I could get that right now. Oh, you got all access? I could give you no money up front and I can walk out and I got 1,000 games and back compat, and they've really positioned themselves to, I know that guy. Mm-hmm. I know a guy. Wait, you got Madden and 2 all in that? Right now, sign me up. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? Now, the other thing I do want to push back a little bit, my sacred crew. I love y'all. But the only thing I do want to push back is that I know we get into the whole nurturing versus, buying and, it being hollow. And I understand. And on ILP, we talked about the whole LeBron versus Jordan. Mm-hmm. I feel Jordan's the true. He was in the Eastern Conference, the Pistons, the Celtics, and here comes LeBron. Oh, he's just going to team up with Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, I hated that Heat team. I hated
it.
Yeah.
Bro, I hated that team. I feel it to my soul. This is what I will say, though. To me, when it comes to games, I think it's a sign of intelligence when you look at your deficiencies and say, you know what, those guys make the best games. It's just Sony. I mean, we can't deny the quality, right? That third, what I call a hashtag just one, that third person over the shoulder cinematic experience, rich story. We get it, right? And I'm sitting there begging for Xbox. Like, when are y'all getting this? Like, Xbox community drags me. I'm like, it'd be like, oh, we don't need to copy them. Yes, you do. Those games are successful. People love them. Please copy on some level, right? So for me, when it comes back to the whole nurturing thing, to me, the sign of intelligence is to work on that deficiency, get people in, because clearly who's in house ain't able. So for me, I don't care how you get there, just get there. I'm looking for the end result. If the end result is these are quality games, I'm in. And the reason why I have hope, and I want to end it with hope, is that, look, they've got a lot to manage. I get it. We don't know how this thing's going to play out. This thing could still blow up in their face. We could still talk about, some studios died and, what did they really do? And we could do a retrospective on Activision 10 years. Like, we could have a joke podcast about it. But I just think for me, I look at it and I'm in the trenches, man. I'm in the trenches with ILP. I'm at the shows. I go to all these devs. I speak behind the scenes. I speak to the Ninja Theories, the Compulsions, the Obsidians, the Undead Labs. And they tell me, like, bro, is it real? They really letting you do what you want to do? They really, and they're like, yeah, COG is, it's someone, I think Compulsion used the example of a beer, distillery. Like, we're this small little group that made small beers, and then here comes Budweiser and says, do what you want, right? And it's like, and you see a thing like, it's probably not the greatest example, but you see a thing like Bleeding Edge, where that would not have been made, like, under their current structure. I look at, I look at Undead Labs with this kind of janky little cute Xbox Live game that I love with State of Decay. It's janky, but now look at them with a budget. So it's the hope, right? It's the possibilities, and that's, I think, what a lot of us are getting into. But it's up to them to execute the vision. And I love this conversation, Colin, because we gotta still hold their feet to the fire. You still have to execute. You still inherited a horrible culture. These like that HR with Activision Blizzard is a mess.
Yeah.
You've inherited that. You've got to, and on top of that, I use a personal example. Like, I'm personally, my mom, like, she hated the fact that I went to, say it's public. She hated the fact that I went to Facebook / Better, right? And I'm like, look, I get it, Mom. I get the concern, but my thing is now the eyes are on them. The FTC is on them. People are on them. You'd be stupid to mess up. And Maddie, remember we clowned Blizzard when Mikey Barra and the other one, the woman, the female, and then she left in the middle of, like, you're supposed to overpay that woman. You're in a scandal about women losing.
That was still
their
the
life.
funniest shit ever. when they were getting called out for that, and then they just underpaid her anyway. It's like, what the fuck?
It's like, what are you doing, right? So it's like, that's what I'm saying. So part of me likes that they're in the fire and the antitrust. Oh, you think you're going to keep buying, you Take-Two next year and WB next year? The antitrust is on you. Like, you. So I like that you sparked this discussion, because now the eyes are on them and they have to be held accountable. And I like it. So I'd rather work in those conditions under the options.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. I agree that, like I said earlier, Microsoft has a very renowned culture to work at. It's supposed to be a very good place to work. And so getting away from that Activision Blizzard mentality, also, I think Microsoft must feel bullish about the product in some way. I said on ILP, and I believe it, that I don't think Microsoft really has a plan right now for this, like a full plan. I think that they're kind of building it in the air. I think they had a bounce, or a jump rather, because I think it was the right thing to do for them. But I do wonder just how, I guess, like, how things will, I think to your point, make its way through the different studios. The culture will stop at the water's edge. Will it move forward and kind of wash over everyone and become more positive for everyone? And shout out to Undead Labs, by the way, because I think that is one acquisition Sony or Microsoft has made that makes sense. Like, that's a Sony style acquisition. When that happened amongst the others that they announced, I was like, of course. Why wouldn't you? Yeah. I was surprised they didn't get Moon and a few others, but
Moon, I was surprised. Yeah.
So that was a studio that made sense to me. All right, well said. Let's go over to Chris and wrap this up here with you, Chris, and your thoughts. What do you? How do you leave it with Game Pass, and what do you want to kind of put a point on as we move out of here?
I don't know. I guess I kind of want to talk a little bit about the nature of PlayStation getting it, because in my view, just this acquisition, we're talking about how Microsoft is they're raising all these IPs, and it's like, there's a lot of wishful thinking there. But I don't think for a second that this move was not aggressive. towards Sony specifically, I think there's a reason why you saw. I mean, aside from all the chips falling into place, like the whole work culture problem, the whole Blizzard PR, the Bobby Kotick stuff, like all that stuff definitely helped him. But they saw an opportunity to take 70% of the profits from Sony's best-selling game on their platform, and I don't know if necessarily. I don't know if that's necessarily a bargaining chip for getting it on that cert. I did bring up the same thing that Maddie brought up, the idea that, oh, maybe you get some of our first party, you get Activision, maybe we get some of your backwards compatible PS1 titles, hopefully not at 28 frames a second.
Yeah, and PAL or whatever.
Yeah, PAL. Oh my God. You know the off topic, but the Majora's Mask thing on Nintendo Switch is the PAL version, and it makes me so upset. But I don't know. I feel like, especially with there was rumors, I know, in September of last year of like a TV dongle that would run Game Pass and things like that, where I feel like they are trying to like control as much ground as possible. But I don't necessarily think that Game Pass on PlayStation will happen. I still feel like they're really bullish on keeping that a separate experience. I just I can't imagine it. I wouldn't be surprised, because the walls have been knocked down so hard by this kind of acquisition. We're seeing, even just before that, we saw MLB The Show on, with the Sony logo on Xbox, and I was like, what the hell is this? This is out of a fever dream. This is a COVID dream that I'm having. And and now you've got, hey, we're going to keep putting Call of Duty on PlayStation, even though we own it, and just Minecraft Dungeons. Here's a new thing that doesn't necessarily have to be on PlayStation, but it's Minecraft adjacent. So here you go. And it's a very strange, this is a very unpredictable industry to be a part of now. And maybe I just can't get out of this old mindset where it's like, I cannot visualize that until I see it. And the last thing I will say is, $70 billion is a lot of money to spend. I think you could have put Snow in Halo Infinite for a little bit less.
Now we're talking.
You ain't doing the biome
talk.
Just a little fucking snow.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
Anyway,
loves it.
Yeah, 343. What an interesting story about them, and the initiative too. I think with the initiative, I think Microsoft blew it. They had a lot of talent. They lost a lot of that talent in the interim years. I mean, they had the co-director of Resistance 3. One of the leaders of their teams, who found the opening at that, and he'll tell you, found the opening at the initiative because I told him that they were hiring. Weird little thing. Almost lost a little, but then he came back. He went back to Insomniac, so he's back there. No one cry. All right, Dustin. Let's end with you. Where do you want to leave it? Game Pass thoughts. It's interesting to think about Game Pass on PlayStation. I totally agree. Like, what are the mechanics of that as well? But I see no barrier to that if that's what Sony wants, right? Microsoft will be like, whatever you want. It would just first party and second party games, sure. Just it's this much money instead of this much money, sure. I think that is their goal. A lot of people, even on our show, ask like, what is Xbox's end game? And I'm like, the end game is Game Pass on everything. I think that's the end game, and they'll put it on your.
What if the
fucking
stipulation is that they had to call it? The stipulations that they had to call it like Lame Pass.
Yeah, Lame Pass
or something.
Definitely the Sony Lame Pass.
A Jim Ryan original right there.
Jim, what game are you playing? Well, right now I'm playing the new PlayStation 5 game, Ratchet and Clank Into the Nexus. All right. Anyway, yeah, sure you are, Jim. All right, Dustin, talk to me.
So okay, so coming up last, I'm trying to figure out exactly what to say that hasn't been said yet, but I think that I want to just reiterate, because Chris said that he can't imagine the mechanics of Game Pass on PlayStation, and this was a bit of a contention between Colin and I the last episode. People say we don't disagree enough on sacred symbols. Well, there you go. That was our moment there where
I caught you, Dustin. I heard you.
Yeah, I'm like, here's the thing for me is that, is there a reality where Xbox is on or Game Pass is on PlayStation? Of course, anything is possible now in this new landscape. The thing that I think that that needs to be defined, of course, is like, what does that look like? There's no way it's the version of Game Pass you see on Series X right now. And some people mentioned from Sacred Symbols that we didn't bring up the option, or we didn't talk about it being streaming as the option. And I'm sorry, but Xbox game streaming is cool tech. It is making waves every year that it exists. It's not ready yet. I know that there are some people that have great experience with it, and there's other people that do not. It is extremely location dependent. I've tried it in multiple states. It's not ready yet. And even I would argue, maybe I'd love, someone to show me this, but like, is someone going to have a great experience playing Doom Eternal streaming a game like Doom Eternal with that level of latency?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Destiny PvP.
I
or
hate
something?
streaming.
No way.
I can't stand streaming. I just can't. I can't stand the idea of streaming video games just because I feel like Cog will have a better experience. Of course, he's having a better experience being in the New York metropolitan area as opposed to someone, in Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, I tried it in DC, right in my parents' house, and I had a very similar experience, which maybe it's possible that both my network...
Similarly bad experience, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah. And so it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, you could blame it on my network or my parents' network or whatever, but it's like, if this is supposed to be or potential a universal service, if this is supposed to be the selling point, it needs to work for almost everybody. Surely, I understand there's people that have 1 megabyte internet it's just simply not going to work for. I get that. But as someone who has 300 down here at home, it should work. And it doesn't. Yeah. Maybe I need to try it again. Like I said, it's growing substantially.
Just not even challenging you, just out of curiosity.
It was sometime when they added the feature to Series X to be able to just instantly stream something before you download. It was like late last year.
Yeah.
No,
that's fairly recent. That's fairly recent.
So
that's perfect.
So anyway, where I'm getting with all this is just that if Game Pass ever comes to PlayStation, I argue that it would be hard to even call it Game Pass, in that it will be so incredibly different. And even then,
right,
the streaming needs to, if the solution is streaming and not porting these games, they've got a lot of work to do between now and then to make it compelling option.
Dustin, have you considered the fact that maybe you just suck?
Daily, honestly.
That's a comment for sure. That's just a comment that you're going to get.
Salty pony.
No, but Dustin, I hear you though on the curated list part. I agree with you that if it did come, I'm with you. I don't know if it can exist it can't in the same form. So it would have to be curated in some type of very weird specific. And in that case, is it truly Game Pass? I understand your point.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. My vision, it has always been curated. Like I think that's like a very PlayStation specific version of it. Right. But who knows? My visions are wrong as just as often as they are.
Is it possible they do the amount of legwork this would take, but I just want to entertain the idea. Because again, before this, we were like, oh, there's no way that Xbox buys Activision. Well, guess what happened?
Yeah.
Is there a possibility that they just say like these are downloadable games that you can play on your PlayStation, like the port work? Do you think Xbox does that? Do you think like, I know, I mean, I gotta ask you, Colin, actually, because now I think about it, you were the one who was saying like, I think it's whatever they want. Like, do you think they go to that length?
Maybe. I've said it before. People don't want to believe it, but like Microsoft was talking about bringing Master Chief Collection to PS4. They were, like those conversations did happen when I was still at IGN. We reported on them at the time. And like we said, I think on a show recently, at IGN, we had Halo on DS. That game also existed. And
was it the first one, or was it a spinoff?
What'd you say?
Was it the Halo on DS? Is that like the first game, or is it a spinoff?
It was a oh, go ahead, Chris.
It was like some janky, like low res remake, like redo of Halo 2. It did not. It was like a pitch from like a studio that they brought.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, like we had people didn't believe it. So what ended up happening was it was Matt Casamassina and Mark Bozon at the time on IGN Nintendo. In the office, they had their 2 DSs and they were playing it like live, and the camera was showing that they were actually playing this game. It was like a 1-on-1 or whatever. So I just bring that up because they've played around with the idea of doing that stuff. And I think Rare was still doing some third-party stuff even when they were getting purchased, I guess fulfilling maybe various contracts. So, and it reminds me a little bit of Sony. Like the one example of Sony buying a studio that it never worked with before outside of Nix's is Psygnosis, which turned into Cambridge. Liverpool. But they were still publishing games on, like Wipeout was on the reason.
Oh, it's my baby.
Yeah, Wipeout was on PC. Wipeout was on N64 as well. So yeah, these companies have done different things in the past. I just don't know what's going to end up happening here. It's very compelling to think that they could just hold Sony over the barrel and be like, we'll do a first and second party Game Pass for an exorbitant amount of money and all of this, and I think that's kind of their end goal. I think that they would be very happy to do that. I just think Sony is many years away from letting that happen probably, and we'll have to see. I think though that I want to leave it there. You guys have done a great job. Thank you for taking the time today. And I think the thing that Game Pass needs most is the Bible, because God, so many of you need Jesus. It's not even funny. Reading the internet right now. So, hopefully that ends up coming to Game Pass at some point as well. But all seriousness, boys, thank you so much. Dukes, appreciate you guys. Go check out their show if you don't watch it or listen to it already. Their weekly Xbox podcast, Defining Duke, and of course, Defining Duke Ultimate, the subsequent or the supplement podcast. Thank you, boys. And of course, Sons, thank you for your time. Chris, I know you got to go and do an iPhone press conference now. Appreciate you.
I got to crawl through. You can't see, but everything outside of the camera frame just totally burned down. Total rubble.
Thank God you're okay. All right. Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
See ya.
Take care, guys.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.